Good afternoon, everyone. The May 12th, 2026 work session of the Gwinnett County Board of Education is now called to order. Without further delay, I turn the meeting over to Interim Superintendent Dr. Al Taylor to bring us our first agenda item.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons. Before I get started, I did want to just make sure that you all were aware. Of course, you know, Mr. Bernard Watson has stepped in for the interim chief engagement officer, but with us tonight we have Dr. Nicole White, who's stepping in as interim teaching and learning, and Dr. Debbie Durrance, who's going to be stepping in as the chief accountability officer. But I wanted to make sure that you were formally introduced to him before we got started. So, good afternoon, everyone. And at this time, we will have George Gomez, Chief of Staff, and Dr. David Goldie, Legislative and Policy Administrator, provide a legislative and policy update. Dr. Goldie. Yep.
Dr. Goldie will do a 10-15-minute presentation to include a wrap-up for this year's legislative session, and he will end with some next steps for next year's legislative session. So, David?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gomez. Good evening, Board Vice Chair Dr. Simmons, board members, and Dr. Taylor. So let's start with policy. So old business from last month, we did bring policy FD, long-term facilities planning, last month, with a recommendation it be laid on the table for 30 days. We have not received any feedback or proposed revisions for this policy, so we're bringing this for, as recommended for approval at Thursday's business meeting.
So let me weigh in 1 second before we move on to either policy FD or the next policy FDC with cell phones. We did get a request from our new superintendent for the board to postpone policy until her effective date of July 1st. Wanted to mention that before we just went on to the next cell phone policy. So there is a request from Dr. Estrella to postpone policies for now. So I just wanted to bring that up before we take a vote or make any action on the policies that are on the table.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gomez. So in your packet, you have draft proposed revisions. The idea of bringing these revisions is that this is a phased-in approach for JCDAF. House Bill 1009 was signed by the governor, and it has to be implemented no later than July the 1st, 2027. So in your packet, you have a copy of the proposed revisions and a copy of the bill. So this is a recommendation that this is brought to the board for discussion to see if the board wishes to move forward with a phased-in approach to changes to this policy. By this time next year, we have to have implemented the changes bell to bell, but this is just for board discussion.
So again, I'm sorry. I know It seems like David and I are at odds, but David did not receive the email today. So in all fairness to David, and I apologize, David, I know you were not looped in that email.
No
there is a request from Dr. Estrella to postpone policy adoption until July. So don't know if that's something that you guys as a board want to take up now, but I don't want to make a recommendation to move policy FDC cell phone forward or FD forward because there is that request. So I don't know what the board would like to do with that request before we move any further.
Yeah, I also want to clarify that she also mentioned to us when we were in a meeting that she wanted to explore more also around getting more information, data, and research around the impact of the policy and figuring out the implications and the impact to students, and also understanding how to navigate it in a way that really fits the needs of high school populations that we have, and trying to navigate their different needs while meeting of course, the law. So we're trying to, we're having discussions around that, so it might not necessarily be July where we're voting on it. It might take longer than that. I just want to set expectations around it might be longer than that because she wants to really use data and have more conversations with students and with teachers and with systems, which I personally appreciate the intentionality around trying to understand better how to implement the law in a way that does seem where it's more consistent across different schools. And so I do support that. So
Yeah, and I'll just jump in really quickly. Relative to the cell phone policy, I actually had a chance to converse with her today about it. And where we landed if we weren't gonna, if the board isn't going to go ahead and push it forward now, I requested that we not do it next year then. The challenge would be if we wait till after July, we start school, and there's not going to be a runway for training and for communication, and so it wouldn't go well. So, and we're fine if we, if we're going to, if we don't want to move forward. I do want to make sure that there was also, as Mr. Gomez was talking about, not just the cell phone policy, but really kind of getting direction on policies in general, how we're moving forward.
And we're going to be talking about that in our second part, governance discussion. But also to that point, to also be clear or to reiterate, the law doesn't take place until 2027. So we actually have our school year to figure this out and to make sure we get it right. And so I do support that process and her recommendation around that.
All right. Thank you for the clarification, Dr. Taylor and Mr. Gomez. I just wanted to provide the rationale for what these revisions were. So do we just wish to move on to the legislative update?
I'd like to know, is it currently on the table? I can't remember the exact, did we put this on the table last month?
No.
Or was it?
Yes, so
Okay.
policy FD, which is facilities.
Right.
That was old business to be voted on tomorrow, Thursday.
Right.
Policy FDC,
Sorry,
cell phone,
yeah.
that would be new business. That you
Okay,
guys
so
had
that will
asked
not
us-
be on the agenda under
Right,
new
so as of
business.
tonight, we will take that off the agenda, and we will not have you vote on it or put it on the table on Thursday.
Okay. Unless, for some reason, we as a board thought that a progressive step toward the final, which is due a year from now, which I don't think is necessarily a bad idea. But I do know that the final version would have to, or needs to, come with Dr. Estrella's input. I just wonder if anyone thinks that an interim step where we're, leaving the kids so they get used to this idea that there are, instead of the kind of cold turkey, hey, beginning bell to end bell, that maybe there's something in the middle that we as a board could look at. I don't know if there's any appetite for that or not, but I'd love to just hear thoughts from my other board members along those lines.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think for me, I think that as per Dr. Estrella's request is to allow her to have some time to review the implications and do a little bit more research and get a little bit more feedback from our students and our teachers. I do think that is helpful before we put it on the table, because I think if we have a draft that's a more complete draft that includes more of their engagement, I think then we can put it on the table for additional community feedback that I think would seem to be more complete. Just my perspective. I would rather get the feedback internally before we put it on the table. In particular with Dr. Estrella's feedback, my understanding is she's had experience with this particular policy and how it's been executed. And so there's some insights that I think that she could provide that is not available at this point. She's not currently here as a superintendent yet, but there's I think some insights that she may be able to provide that could help. But I do support, obviously, following our process around putting this on the table for community feedback to be able to allow our constituents to give us perspective around what they think.
Yeah, I also agree that Dr. Estrella should have her input on this policy as well, but I also know that the district's done a lot of good work implementing the K through 8 portion of this policy that was passed last year. And like my colleague, Mr. Knutson said, I think that they can share with Dr. Estrella as she comes on board as our new superintendent to put a provisional process in place maybe sooner than later, not wait until 2027 to give the students in high school an opportunity feel what it's like before it's a kind of, jump on board, cold shoulder before the policy's implemented full swing. So I think there's a chance for her to learn, to understand what we've already done and the process that we put in place to, get that done right away. So I think there's a chance there for her to make that happen and for us to share with her. So I'm open to her being part of this. I'm open to us laying it on the table and keeping it available for her to take a look at. So thank you.
I also support Dr. Estrella's insight on this policy in particular, especially because she has experience implementing this policy. One other thing I'm also very excited about, and some of the conversations I've had with her, is around the gathering the data and the research. And because this is something that she has experienced, I think it would behoove us to wait until she has provided feedback, conducted the research, and then moving forward. As far as the phased-in approach, I think Dr. Taylor mentioned training. If we postpone it until July 2027, that training can take place between now and then, so it gives us a longer runway.
I also support Dr. Estrella's desire to be able to lead this work, to be able to provide perspective. She does bring some experience around having implemented it in I believe her current school district, and is privy to some of the possible implications and things we should consider. Also, the fact that our delegates were so gracious enough to give us a year to implement the policy, I believe that was intentional, and I would like our district to take advantage of that year to make sure we try to get it right, which I believe means we're inclusive of voices in our community. We understand legally what we're required to do, but I think it would behoove us to engage the community around some of the things we should be thinking about as we begin to roll out the requirement next year. And just to try to build up stakeholder buy-in, and whether that means additional training or different thoughts around what it looks like to have those phones locked up, because from my understanding, that could look a number of different ways. So I look forward to Dr. Estrella coming in, leading that work, soliciting input from our community, increasing stakeholder engagement around the legislation so that we can have a smooth rollout in 2027. Thank you.
So just for clarity's sake, that policy is currently on the table, and on Thursday, we were supposed to vote on that policy. What I'm hearing you say.
No, not the cell phone policy. It wasn't on the table yet.
I'm sorry, cell phone policy is a new policy that was being brought up to put it on the table. I apologize. So is the board wish to leave it on the table indefinitely until Estrella can give some feedback, or do you want us to pull it from the table, hold it until Estrella gives some feedback, and then put it back on the table?
Pull it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just want to clarify that.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay, so moving on, if you would like to look at the rest of your packet, there's a couple of informational documents which outline state, federal, and Gwinnett County elections that are obviously currently in progress. We're coming towards the end of the early voting period with the general primary election next week. My goal, once we've got the results in, is to issue you with an updated set of documents that obviously a lot of these names will drop off the list so that you can see who's going to be in the general election in November. So this is just the current list of candidates that are in the primary elections, and that's just for your reference. So the next document, 2026 legislative...
Dr. Goldie, I'm sorry.
Yes, I do apologize.
Sorry to jump in here.
Not at all.
We talked about the cell phone policy. We didn't really discuss the long-term facility plan.
Okay, yes.
I was just wondering, you developed this, right? according to the notes at the end of it. So-
No, I was the one that did the work in Lotus Notes. This was actually developed by the policy committee along with Patrick Burke.
Okay, so, Mr. Burke, I just wanted to make sure that that was part of the process. And I'm just wondering, how does this reflect are we putting into policy a current procedure that basically matches what we've already done in GCPS, or is this something that is, and I think Dr. Estrella has thrown out some numbers that might be longer than what we as a district have traditionally looked at. But I'm just wondering if you could give us a little bit of an update on the context around this.
Thank you for the question, Dr. or Mr.
Yes.
Knudsen. So there are some clarifying points, I think, in the policy. For one, educational specifications, it talks specifically about a cadence, no less than once every 5 years. The whole idea is these elements all line up to a capital planning cycle that takes really kind of a 24-month period leading up to a capital plan development. So it's more clear about that as a requirement that the board approves the educational specifications. It includes facility assessments, so there's a condition element of that that's mentioned in there, as well as a education suitability portion of that. Enrollment forecasting as part of our process for determining capacity needs. So it's basically calling out the key elements of any good facility planning process for a K-12 organization. It culminates into a document, a facility master plan, and so that's a little bit different of a phrase that we're using. We build a capital plan today. This would be sort of the facility component of the capital plan. So if you think about a pie chart representing IT, property, instructional resources, it would be that part of the pie chart that represents facilities.
Primarily encapsulates what SPLOST funds.
Correct. Part of the assessments, one of the goals of the assessments is you don't want to identify issues necessarily that you don't have funding for. Although if you take a longer view of that, obviously it gives you a longer lens beyond the current funding structure.
Okay. And so are these components mostly included in what we do today, although maybe referred to or captured in a slightly different format?
It does. It calls out a couple things that are different. Ed specs, again, specifically, ed specs become your yardstick for assessing facility sort of education suitability component, which could lead to a program within a capital plan. So that's a little bit different maybe than we do it today. Condition assessments are always going to be a part of our capital plan.
Right.
We have to be forecasting facility renewal. And similarly, we are always going to need to think about housing students, so forecasting enrollment needs.
Sure. Okay. And as Dr. Estrella weighed in on this?
Her email was broad and simply said that she was asking the board for consideration to weigh in on all policies moving forward. So if you believe that that includes FD, we can also take action in postponing FD. If you believe it does not include FD, then we can move forward in FD. That's up to the board to decide.
I mean, I personally would love to have, and we've got a couple of days, I'd love to have her input on this policy.
Yeah, she hasn't provided specific feedback around this policy, but she has on other policies.
Can we ask?
And I also want to share that the process around these policies and others is, again, an example of, like, we do ask that we navigate in the space of trust in the way that our committee, in terms of the policy committee, has worked with Patrick Burke, Mr. Burke, and also with our other school system members, Dr. Taylor, as well as our policy expert in engaging this new policy. And there are also content from other policies that have been brought in. So, like, I know we've had conversations before where, like, if it's duplicative, it's sort of like null, but it's not. In fact, we have many policies that bring in content from other policies that help to strengthen and reinforce the power of a particular policy. And this is such as an example of a policy that, again, brings in other content too, but yet creates more clarity around the process. So I do want to uplift that this has been really a collaborative effort with the school system and not something that one or two board members created. And I do think that it's important for us to, again, continue to engage in the work of trusting the process in that way. And so I also want to share that this is on the table for 30 days, and board members can continue to provide feedback and edits on this particular policy, including Dr. Straya and the community members can certainly provide additional feedback on this policy as needed.
FD is actually.
Oh,
gonna
I'm sorry,
be- yeah.
FD is up for vote, that's correct, because it's already been on the policy. Have we gotten, so then the next question, that's right, it's been on the policy, on the table already for 30 days. Have we got any,
I believe Dr. Golding mentioned at the beginning that we have received no feedback from
feedback,
constituents on policy
Well,
FD.
So I think the question, and because I know that Ms. Stone and you, Dr. Teresa, are part of the policy committee, and the other board members and myself, we're not a part of that. The question is, in light of Dr. Estrella's request to be able to review and weigh in on policies, is there any apprehension around holding off on voting on this policy later this week? Or is there anything we should be thinking about in terms of a decision on whether or not to move forward with the vote or to wait for Dr. Estrella to have a look and weigh in?
if I remember correctly, and I can verify, but if I remember correctly, she hasn't provided specific feedback around this policy, but she has on others. So we can verify for Thursday, but this
Yeah,
one,
I'd like to- I mean, she has specifically
I don't think it
talked-
was an issue specifically around this, but we can certainly verify. But this was sent to her. Let me just say this, that all of our policies that we've worked on has engaged Dr. Estrella. All of them, at this point, right? Since
I think maybe if we get the message rolled up tight enough on that carrier pigeon, it could get to her and back maybe by the time we vote on this Thursday. It's not a difficult ask to ask her specifically, because she has specifically mentioned a 30-year facility plan. She has ideas around this subject. I would just like to know if she's had the chance to weigh in specifically. I don't think that's a hard ask.
I don't think no one is saying it's a hard ask, Mr.
Okay, then-
Knudsen. I think what we're saying is
You
is
just
that I'm
spent
going
5
to
minutes
verify.
explaining why we don't need to.
I didn't say
Can you
that.
just say that, yeah, we'll ask her.
I did not say that. I said that I'm going to ask. Did anyone hear me say that she did not say? I said I'm going to verify with her. But what I can recall is from the email that I see that she has not given specific direction around this. I'm going to verify on my email. I'm pulling it up now. But I don't recall that, so no one is saying that specifically we don't do that. I just want to make sure that we are making sure that she is okay with us following through on this process or not.
Thank you, Dr. Golding.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so returning to the legislative summary document that you have, this was correct as of a little after 5 p.m. this evening. This document has been updated throughout the day because today is day 40 following the legislative session. So today is the day that the governor has to sign, veto any bills that he wants to take action on, or do nothing and they become law automatically. So there's been a stream of bills that are being signed today. The bills that you have listed there, signed by the governor, this is officially confirmed on the governor's website. The next step for these will be sent to division chiefs for a detailed analysis, impact analysis, with regard to operations, finances, policy implications, timelines of implementation. So those emails can now go out now that they've been signed. On the next page, you will see a very short list that currently there is no confirmed official word on what's happened to those bills. So certain things can happen to these bills. They may well be signed today, in which case the governor's website will be updated, and we may have confirmation on those either later this evening or tomorrow. The governor may decide to veto any of those, or he may do nothing with those. So those are the ones that are in the gray area that we're potentially just waiting to see what the official final position is on those. Following that are the proposed study committees, which I've shared with the board previously. They will operate later this summer and into the fall with a view to providing possible legislative recommendations for the next session. Just below that, you'll see proposed blue ribbon study committees. About 6 or 7 have been announced over the last couple of weeks. They're called blue ribbon study committees because basically it's the General Assembly leadership that have requested that these happen. So you'll see that there's 2 specifically related to education and students. One about education performance metrics and workforce stability, and another one about online platforms. Because they've been specifically requested by House leadership, these are the ones we'll actually watch probably just maybe more closely than the study committees, because these are more likely to come with recommendations for the next legislative session. Either way, we will be tracking all of these study committees. They will all come with final recommendations, typically late November, early December, with recommendations for potential legislative action. So those we'll be tracking over the next several months. On the next page, the back page, the general primary is going on at the moment. This is just an update. I did inform the board about House Bill 540, a ballot question. I did speak with election supervisor at the county elections office yesterday, and this ballot question that should have been on the general primary, the election board is going to be voting on it next week to schedule it for the November the 3rd general election. The good thing about that is that this provision was due to go into place January the 1st, 2027, and with it being on the ballot in November, it will still meet the original timeline of its implementation. Okay?
Did they provide any insight as to why it didn't make the May 19th ballot?
They just said it was an oversight, and they were thankful that we pointed that out to them. So they were able to take action to have it put on the November ballot. And then finally, next steps. So obviously I've mentioned that all the bills that have been signed, that we're going to have a detailed impact analysis on all of those bills. We will get them to the board when they're ready. Looking ahead to the next legislative session. So November the 3rd is the general election, and that will dictate who will be members of the General Assembly for the 2027-2028 session. Obviously, it will also designate who will be our delegation members, maybe some new members. Things to consider, and I know we've discussed this with the board previously, the legislative packet. We talked about starting earlier to put that together. We would need to update some of the data that's included, the contents, but also we had discussions about the presentation format, something more professional, something more exciting for our legislators to want to pick up and to look through. Obviously, following this session, there may be some more updated legislative language requests that we can put in. The board obviously will start working on their legislative priorities. The recommendation is that perhaps starting the legislative packet in August, that maybe we start in September. We typically start October, November with the view to finalizing in December. I think this year we finalized in January, so it would be good to start a little bit earlier so we can have that finally approved prior to the session starting. And then a recommendation for a pre-session delegation meeting. Obviously, we're not going to know who our delegation members are until after the November the 3rd election. Because it's a new biennial legislative session, all the incumbent and new delegation members, they have a conference in early December in Athens in the Classic Center to get them ready for the legislative session. So a recommendation is either sometime in December or maybe early January. We meet with the delegation to go through the legislative packet and for the board to share their legislative priorities. But obviously, nothing needs to be decided today. I just wanted to put that out there as a potential timeline for the board. Okay.
Dr. Goldie, real quick question for
Yes.
you. Can you, just these Blue Ribbon Study Committees, these two
Yes.
topics are fantastic. I absolutely love them. I think they're
Yes.
great. I think these are good points to highlight. Can you take a couple seconds and just highlight what they look like? Who are the members? What do they do?
So typically, there's about 10 members in each committee. They'll elect a chair. I looked at the committees. They're both House committees. We've got a couple of delegation members on the education performance metrics. The ballot, and these are members who are in office until December the 31st. Obviously, they're up for election for the next session if they're voted in by electors. So they're still working in their current elected session. I believe the balance is the education performance metric, I believe, is 7 Republican, 3 Democrat members. And the online platform, I believe, is 6 Republican and 4 Democrat. I can actually get you the list of all the members that are on those 2 committees. Okay, yeah, no problem.
When does the session start in January?
It's the second Monday. If I could take a second and look at my calendar.
Second Monday?
Second Monday. So it's going to be, I would say, January the 11th,
Okay,
2027.
okay, thank you.
Okay. And the very last document there, the governor did sign the FY27 budget today. With yesterday's signing of House Bill 463, which reduced state income tax, but also increased standard deductions, that put a $1.3 billion hole in the projected state budget for FY27. So as a way of clawing some of that money back, the governor has taken an initial step, and I have an article that was posted at 4 o'clock today. He's clawed back $300 million of that by removing line items from the FY27 budget that was new spending. That's how he classified it. So he's taken out that new spending. Now, you're probably thinking, what about the other $1 billion that's a shortfall? So he's going to wait and see. There's expected growth in revenues, and let's say the growth was an extra 400 or 500 million, then the remaining amount will come out of reserves, but that will all be done with the amended FY27 budget next spring. Okay, so that's how the governor's handling by signing the income tax bill yesterday. I think that closes my
I
presentation.
just want to circle
Yes.
back to House Bill 540. So that's
Yes.
the bill that was supposed to be on the May 19th ballot. It's
Yes.
a bill that will expand the $2,000 homestead exemption for public service workers to include all GCPS employees. So this is a bill that I certainly want to see on the ballot and would like to see passed so that our employees have more tax relief. Is there a certain process that is in place to make sure that bills get on the ballot? I want to be reassured that it's going to even show up on the November ballot. So was there a part of the process that wasn't followed appropriately?
So I haven't gone into details with the elections office. They said it was an oversight, so there's something happened within their process. I know they reported the elections board met in February and put House Bill 539 on the ballot, but they didn't put House Bill 540. So it was something within the elections office processes. They said it was an oversight on their part, and this is how they're fixing it.
So is there a way for the district to ensure that this is going to be on the ballot in November? Is there a way to put a check in place to make sure that it shows up on the ballot in November?
Yeah, I can make a phone call or a personal visit to the elections office after the Board of Elections meeting next week, and just to confirm that that call has been placed.
I, for one, would appreciate it, and I'm sure our GCPS employees would too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I have a general comment in particular around the impact related to the exemptions, and if you can share a little bit more details.
Property tax bills, Senate
Yes.
Bill 33?
You can share a little bit more details around the specific impact, because we know the majority of our
Yes.
school budget is related to our property taxes.
Yes.
And we also know that we are hit in multiple different directions and multiple angles around really divestments around public school education.
Yeah.
And so I specifically would like to know, how is GCPS going to be impacted by these?
Yes. Well, I have a reasonable working knowledge of the impacts, but I know there's an expert sitting off to my left who will be able to give you as many details as you need.
Thank you, Dr. Goldie. Good afternoon, Dr. Therese, board members. Thank you for your question, Dr. Therese. Yes, it has been one of the, I think, sores in this entire budget process for us, because we were planning for this, hoping that, obviously, we certainly support, and I think we've worked so closely with the legislative body through David Goldie's really direction. I think we and every other school district did what they could to rationalize this process, but we still planned for it. As a matter of fact, we built the budget, as you recall, with digest growths projected for FY27 well below inflation. And so what this bill does essentially is, now you no longer have the flexibility you have where your House Bill 581 allowed you to opt out of a statewide homestead exemption. Now you cannot opt out. It has already been passed. So there will be a floating statewide exemption, essentially, that is tied to inflation. It impacts maybe, 45 to maybe 60% of our property tax residential assessed values. So what essentially it would end up doing is, we planned we would probably be losing 35 to 40 million per year. Even with digest growths, as we've had in the past, averaged maybe between 5 and 8%, it will now be down to inflationary rates. So you're looking maybe 2, 3, 4%, maybe max. But we're budgeting well below that. And we knew that we had to tighten up. We knew that we had to start looking for efficiencies. We knew we had to start planning ahead. But in return, the bill also allowed districts to have the fund balance reserves caps lifted. So it's now fund balance reserves, the statutory limit was 15%, if you recall. They raised it to 25%. These, I think, are the real impacts of the two bills. We would potentially continue to lose revenue. We would not be impacted into FY27 budget. In FY28 and FY29, that's where you're going to start feeling the impact.
Thank you for that, and this is really an important conversation. And this is the impact of legislation, especially when we have the majority of the school systems in our metro county in particular who are advocating against this, right?
I
Mr. Goldie,
must
is that
add to
correct?
that, though, Dr. Therese,
Yes.
it does put in a provision that revenue could be made up through revisions to the equalization grant. So the state would have to revise the equalization grant, and it can also impact our local 5 mil share. So there is a possibility of getting revenue back, but certainly not to the extent of what we would be losing.
Right. And this is a conversation we've had the past few years where with equalization, we really haven't really engaged in
That's
any
correct.
increases there.
That's correct.
And now this, again, raises the issue around how are we continuously funding our public school education where the costs are continuously rising for multiple reasons. And so I appreciate that our school systems across the metro area work together to try to advocate collectively to request for this not to be something that will be considered on the ballot, but it is here. And I know that as a homeowner myself, I know that it does give benefits to our homeowners. But the greater impact is also on how are we appropriately funding our public school systems. And what I see in the larger spectrum is the impact to certain schools that might not, that still continue to need funding and investments. And so I just have a really deep concern, as many school systems in our metro area have, around how do we continuously fund public schools. Our public school systems need to be fully funded. We have charter schools being implemented. We have, this is not negative to charter schools, I'm saying. This is, again, some of the things that's happening in our sphere. Micro schools, we have private schools, we have the vouchers, we have all these things. We have now disinvestments. So we have multiple things kind of coming against our public school systems that we have to figure this out. And I do look forward to having the time, I think you said 2 years or a year, for us to really work through this to figure out how do we create the efficiencies to be able to make sure that we're meeting the need of each and every child and that we're investing appropriately. But I see you have $35 million per year. $35 million per year. That is significant. This is a bill, and this is why who you vote for in the legislature matters. Because you have people. Again, I understand the benefit. I'm a homeowner myself. But education is the future of our economy, our nation, our safety and security of our communities, and the United States. It's important for us to invest in education. I think there is a saying. What was the saying we heard at Marietta School System? The budget is the moral document. The moral document. And where is the morality in this document? Keeping our homes, I understand that. And public education is power. And if we continue to move away and disinvest in public education, we have a problem. And this is a really big deal. $35 million per year impact. And frankly, who is it going to impact more? I am in a district where most of our schools in District 5 are at-promise schools. I believe that it would disproportionately impact our Title I schools, our economically disadvantaged communities, our majority historically marginalized communities. I think that this will negatively impact them as well, and it will continue to further the gaps if we don't do what we need to do to make sure that we're not closing those gaps. Again, I have hope that we can do what we can and be smart about the process, and it also is really indicative of who's making these decisions.
Thank you. And two very quick final points on that. The board probably recalls there's been a significant number of groups, agencies, legislators pushing for a veto of the bill based on the constitutionality, because in the Constitution, bills that generate revenue supposed to originate in the House. So it will remain to be seen if any legal challenges are made. The other thing to consider is, as we go into the next legislative session, there may be something our district and other school districts can do to help mitigate some of the impacts to the revenues. Okay, thank you, Dr. Taylor. Thank you, board.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Golding and Mr. Gomez. For sake of time, just to make sure you have time for your discussion, I'll combine these next two. Of course, you'll see the dates for the first public hearing on this Thursday at 5, and then the second public hearing and final adoption at the end of this month. In addition, if you have items that you have questions about from the business meeting, we don't have to necessarily take them right now. You can reach out to me over the course of the next day or so, and I'll be able to get you responses to any of the consent agenda items or anything on the business meeting that you are interested in hearing about. Right now, there are two anticipated presentations. One, the, is it Achievement Preparatory Academy? The Achievement Preparatory Academy was the charter school petition that was brought forward that we asked them to revise. So they're coming back, they've brought back the revision. We'll bring that back before you with a recommendation in June. The district assessment.
Ms. Marie,
Oh,
I
I'm
have a
sorry.
question. Was the vote to revise it? Because if I recall, we voted on that. I don't recall the vote was to revise. What was the,
We have to, you remember?
The vote was to give them 90 days to regather data and resubmit. Correct. That was the vote, and we all approved it.
I'll follow back up.
It was unanimous.
I'll follow back up with you. The second one is actually one of the discussion items that you'll have this evening. We received a request for the June presentation to do a district assessment update. There was a additional request from other board members to actually have a discussion about that to see if this is something that you want to move forward with. And so we're ready to go either direction. But that's actually one of your discussion items for the governance team discussion. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Therese.
all right. So now this is our time for our governance discussion topics. It's 6:49, so I think we're good on time here. Yeah, thank you. So if you'll see, we have copies here in our document. If you look at the outlet, this emails may be helpful to facilitate the discussion, to review that. It should be in front of you. Thank you, Lisa, for making copies to facilitate this discussion. So I'm going to start with kind of some easy things that we can quickly go through and then save time for the discussions that may take more time for us. I think the first thing is, this past weekend, we had a governance team session where we talked about the transition plan. We're working with Dr. Estrella's team on really engaging in the process on how we move forward our school system in the next phase. We talked about what communications could look like, which can include content on our website that has 4 phases that really details the different phases of the transition process. And then as we go through the process, we'll update the website as we go along the way. There are a lot of things that still, I think Dr. Estrella and her team are working on, but in general, I do believe we had a really good, robust conversation where board members are recommending people to be added to the transition team. It looks like it's a task force that's going to include community members. We want a cross-section of community members to be engaged in this process. And Dr. Estrella is really focused on making sure that it reflects the diversity of our Gwinnett County community. And so we are relying on our board members to provide recommendations on people they think Dr. Estrella should consider. And we also have where each board member can appoint 2 members to be a part of that task force. And so I think the excitement around this is really engaging community in the process and making sure that we are continuously building a really strong foundation for our governance team around communications and what the plan would be for our school system going forward. So the transition plan will feed into the strategic plan. And so the 5-year strategic plan will be really a collaborative effort that will come from community, including our teachers, our staff, educational support professionals, and of course our school system here at the ISC building. So any comments, any feedback, any reflections from our board? Okay, so then the next item we have is constituent feedback at board meetings, we also talked about what that could look like, a general conversation around when community members come to our business meetings and make public comments, what is the follow-up? Sometimes board members don't really know what happens after that. They come, they speak, and then we want to make sure that we have a frequently asked questions sort of portal where it still protects, we're following FERPA, we're following all the laws, but at the same time, we're creating a FAQ so that community members who aren't at the meeting can have access to the answers if they weren't present, and they may have the same questions. So we're trying to figure out, and we had a discussion around creating this or amending our SAQ session where it includes public comment from our board meetings. We also talked about a communications tracking system where people who send emails to the board can also, they might send one email to one board member, and we don't get, other board members may not get that same question. So, or there may be 3 different community members sending questions that we may not be privy to. So the tracking system allows us to understand what questions are going to which board member and how they are being answered, because it may be helpful to the board to be able to understand the questions that are being asked. So the communication tracking system will help us to be able to have some transparency around that process internally as a board and understand how the questions are being answered, right? And then I think the third thing was, we said the tracking system, the follow-up, FAQs. Yeah, I think that's it. Anything else, y'all? Any comments, feedback around that? Anything I left out?
Now, I'd like to say that, yeah, the follow-up is a point of interest. I do want to say that I appreciate it. We see it happen at the board meetings where after someone speaks, someone who's appropriate, whether it's a cluster superintendent or whether it's specific to a facilities or HR, finance. I mean, I've seen staff move to those people, move into the lobby, have the conversation with them. And so I just want to applaud that. Because there were times, I know in the past, where I've asked, could someone, because we didn't see that happening, but it has been happening consistently. But it would be helpful to know, so that's the idea behind the tracking system, what ultimately happens. And if those concerns, some of those concerns mirror emails that we get.
Yeah, right.
So we do see some of that, but sometimes it's being addressed, and if there's any more information, we'll let you know. And it's a little vague and not always followed through on. But I did want to ask the question of George, because I think if I get an email sent specifically to me, it's automatically copied on my school board, and we all see it.
Lisa, don't let me say this the wrong way, but you each made individual decisions based on that. So at the beginning, the way that we were doing this, beginning years ago, is what I mean by that, is any email that went to my school board was automatically copied to individuals here at the ISC. This year, each of you made an individual decision as to whether you wanted to continue that or you did not want to continue that. I believe 3 of you are continuing with that, and 2 of you are not. If I remember correctly, that may have shifted since my last memory, but you guys gave individual permission to continue that. So if now I'm a constituent and I send you an email, it also gets duplicated on my school board for your account, because I believe you were one that chose to continue that. I'm not saying she is. I'm just, Dr. Therese may have, I'm not saying you did, may have chosen the opposite. So when she gets it, it does not get duplicated on my school board. Am I saying that correctly, Lisa?
That's correct. That's why I think that's why the tracking system is really beneficial, because we'll be able to get access to what's happening. And there may be questions that are coming from the community that we can also answer that we might not get be privy to.
But the reason I'm asking that question is if we wanted to know what is, because I'd like to know what the concerns are, no matter where they come from across the county. Not that I'm going to weigh in, but I want to be aware. I mean, I thought that's what was happening, was that any email that came in, at least, no matter who it was directed to, we would see it through my school board.
If it is sent to my school board, GCPS K-12, it goes to all the school board members. If it is sent to an individual board member, Steve Knudsen, if you elected for it to just go to you, then it goes to you. If you elected for it to go to my school board, then it goes to my school board. That's why I think I highly encourage our constituents, and I always say I never tell them to email me there. I always encourage people to email my school board at GCPS K-12, and I encourage our board to do the same, because it does help for constituents to be, and for all of our board members to, we represent all of our schools, not just our specific districts. We know we represent our districts, but we're board members for all of our schools. So the benefit of constituents emailing my school board at GCPS K-12 is really preferred, and I just want to encourage
So
that.
shouldn't the default be that we see everything that comes in unless we choose to not see it? I mean, if I don't want to be bothered, but, I mean, I'd like to see everything that comes in, because it affects my ability to understand what's happening throughout the district.
And I think that's the value of the tracking system. I think that's what we're trying to correct. I think we're trying to improve transparency and improve follow-up.
Sure. No,
And I
that's
think this
fine.
is just part of the process. So I appreciate that, but this is part of the remedy of helping with
Yeah,
that.
so I just want to be clear on something. I think I want to be clear on something, so bear with me. If a parent sends something to my school board that is specific to their child with a lot of information, then there's always concerns with spreading, giving that wide, because there's always a FERPA concern with that, right? But if right now, Lisa, if a person sends something to my school board, Dr. Taylor, a couple months ago, challenged us to try to answer that within 48 hours. And I think we've been trying our best to do that, and within 48 hours to connect with the constituent and then give feedback back to the board members. Because I know you send me a lot of emails. I send them back to you saying, tell the board members we've handled this, and then you connect with the individual board members, not with all board members.
If it's sent to just my school board, I communicate with all.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Just sent to one board member, I forward that.
Just one board member. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, so that's the way we're working on it now. We can expand it, and I think, Dr. Therese, you mentioned at the beginning, of course, that it had to be FERPA protected, and we have to follow all the processes. And I do think Dr. Estrella, again, weighed in on this subject via an email saying that she would also want to continue discussion, because there's a number of other factors that she's thinking through that we have to work in. Also, the number of staff that it may require to be able to manage a system like this. So I think what I read into it, and forgive me if I misread it, was more conversation to be had on this subject.
That's correct.
Well, I mean, I'm supportive of the tracking system, and even more so now, given the fact that I thought I was seeing emails that apparently I'm not seeing, so.
All right. The next item is the cell phone policy, which generally, we already talked about that being delayed for a bit, so I don't think we need to really go into that. I just want to continue to encourage us to work with Dr. Estrella as we work through this policy. We have a year to get this done and figure out how to implement this correctly in the way that is best to meet the needs of our students and our teachers, and so that's that part. This was here on the agenda before we got the feedback from Dr. Estrella, so this is another example of she's navigating two school systems right now, and I empathize with her in like navigating closing out a school system, and now we're asking her to review our policy, so we don't have all of the full breadth and depth, but she's giving us feedback on this particular policy and requesting for us to wait on this, just like she did she's provided some other directions as well. And so, and we're waiting on the other direction around the conversation we just had around the facilities policy, which I'm sure she'll give direction around that, and we'll follow that direction. I just don't have the feedback yet, but when we get it, we'll just respect that process. So just being open to that. And so that's that part. So I guess the next two items I think are more of the larger discussions. So the RFI equity,
The governance versus policy committee, are we going to have that discussion?
and then you will take over the equity audit and the, yeah. So the policies versus the governance committee, there's an communication we have related to some direction from our policy expert, Mr. Ben Cleveland. I hope you all have had a chance to read it. And basically, it was more around just giving us some direction around what goes to the board and what doesn't go to the board. And there are some factors to consider. Some of the factors include urgency. If it's urgent, then it should be more focused on our board governance team. If it's more legal compliance, governance-related compliance, like a superintendent evaluation or something like that, that's something that could be more focused on the governance team and not sent to the policy committee. So there are some specific things that we can refer to, but I would just say, just in the sake of time, that like if we can look at recall the training we had from Mr. Ben Cleveland, where Mr. Ben Cleveland went over the policy committee versus the governance committee, and when we make those particular decisions. And so you all should have this particular presentation here that kind of lays out when a decision should go to when a policy should go to the policy committee versus when it should go to the governance team. And so we don't have to go through it. We've already been through training with this. I think it's just here for reference for you all as we have this discussion. But Mr. Cleveland's suggestion is really primarily focused on, well, all of these potentially could go through the policy committee. And this list of policies that we as a board have decided that we would like to work on. So some board members put in their suggestions around what they would like to see for the policy committee to work on. So the question is more, not so much about like what goes to the policy committee now, because I think we can, the suggestion is all of these could go to the policy committee, but it's more around what's the prioritization of the suggested policies that you all have presented. And so the question is, as we look at the policies that you all have submitted, what is the prioritization? Like, what do we want to task for our policy committee to do? So some of them includes new policies like an implementation execution policy. That policy is listed, is already prioritized on this list. If you see, I guess, page number 4, I guess it's the last page on the email under other follow-up actions. And what you'll see here is the implementation execution policy. That policy, 4 board members said they wanted that as a priority. So I kind of organized this in a way that included the feedback from our board. I also want to share that the policy committee still has 2 other policies that they have on the schedule that haven't been addressed, which is the safety policy, which they're currently working on now, and then the equity policy, which Dr. Estrella and Mr. Ben Cleveland and a few other people suggested to wait until we go through the equity audit to kind of help feed in the equity audit information to help make sure that we have a robust policy that's coming out of that policy committee with the data of the equity audit, which we'll talk about. Dr. Simmons will be leading that conversation. But essentially, that's one of that. Those are 2 policies that's not on this list, but it's already on the calendar. So I just want to make that note that that's already on the calendar from the past policy committee. So I want to open up the discussion here to get your feedback on what policies you want prioritized, and then Mr. Kleepen will put a suggested schedule together for the board to review, and the calendar may go out to 2027, because, of course, some of these policies may take longer than others, and we've seen some policies may take 2 months, some policies may take 3 months, so it just depends on the time, but if y'all can just give some direction around which ones you want the policy committee to work on first. So we have, I'm going to name the policies: implementation, execution policy. We have student on the board policy. Dr. Straya also commented on, she has some thoughts around this. Again, all of these policies she will be involved in. Dr. Taylor and his team have been very engaged in all the policy committee meetings. Dr. Taylor is at every meeting. Mr. Gomez is at every meeting. And then they decide on particular staff who need to be present to ensure that they're giving direction to the policy committee members. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about, like, we'll always have representation from the system. Student special needs policy is new. Again, many of these policies may be embedded in other policies. It just is the way it is. We have a lot of policies that kind of reflect other policies in certain policies, so there may be some repetition there, but this is kind of requesting a standalone policy around special needs. Then we have an AI policy, which we already have an AI policy. It's just updating the AI policy to reflect the current environment and the evolving demands of AI. Then we have demonstration versus civics policy. We have belonging policy, ethnic studies policy, environmental safety policies, and then any other policy recommendations. Is this list okay? I kind of organized it in a way that based on the voting and the prioritization, but it's already kind of like aligned in priority, but if y'all want to discuss this, we can certainly.
So I have a question. So the policies listed as new, and I like how you arranged them in order, kind of as a ranking profile. Where did they come from? Where were the recommendations? Did they originate from the policy committee? Did they come from a national list? Were they in other discussions? Where did they come from?
So these actually came from the board, but we do.
I knew some of them did, but I don't recognize some of the, I know, like demonstration, environmental safety policy.
Came from the board. It came from constituents of the board too. Like, so like
Okay.
as we represent, like I've gotten requests as.
Okay.
Right, so these came from the board, but I think where you're getting at is the policy committee also provides, and the last policy committee, what they did was they provided suggestions also on some of the policies they wanted to see. And so we did that also, but we want to make sure that when you look at the charter of our policy committee, the policies can come from and originate from the board, and it can also originate from the policy committee. So we want to make sure that the board or the governance team has voice around, here's what we as a board want to send to the policy committee. And then the policy committee can also say, hey, can the board consider these additional policies? And that's up to them. So what Mr. Cleveland will do is he'll interview each of the board members, the committee members, and then they will share with him the support for these and how they feel about these. And then they will also have the opportunity to suggest other policies they might want to work on. So that's something that is kind of and then we as a board, it'll come back to us, and then we have to decide if we want to squeeze that into the calendar schedule. And that's why his suggestion to us is to consider that it might take more than just 1 year, because these are quite a bit of policies. Now, there are some policies the board will work on that won't be in the schedule, but we'll have to work on that separate and apart from the policy committee. That is policies that come up, whether they're new or revised or updates, but we can work on that as a board separate because it's not on the calendar, because of urgency and all of the other criteria that we talked about in our training that might not fit to go to the policy committee.
No, and I appreciate that, and I also like that you kicked this list back to Ben and had him give his input as to which, if any or if all, might land at the purvey of the policy committee, and he gave his recommendation, and I'm kind of landing in the same thought process as Ben, as I can certainly see most all these policies landing in the laps of the policy committee to help create and envision writing these policies, or at least getting them started for the board. Really, especially student on the board policy, I think, and I know Dr. Estrella has already weighed in on that policy, which I think is great too, because that is something we're starting to see nationally, and it's piqued my interest. And I'd be curious to see what that might look like. But I'm at the opinion that I think these can all land at the desk of the policy committee to have them work on. Again, that's just my personal opinion, but I think these are all that are interesting at this point.
Are you okay with being kind of coming up with some suggested schedule for this? I mean, this isn't, again, it's, I think, ever evolving too, so I don't want us to feel like this is locked in stone, but it is not something we have to vote on, right? This is just a discussion that we have to like just say, hey, are y'all okay with this? And then if so, he can provide a suggested schedule, and of course, he'll be working with our school system to make sure that the schedule is realistic, because we have our team here that also would need to weigh in on the schedule to make sure it's smart, specific, measurable, accurate, all of that, realistic, timely. So that's also in consideration. So Ben will be also helping to facilitate like what that looks like around making sure it's smart timeline. And he did suggest that he'll provide the schedule for us to consider.
I wonder where the legislative, I know Dr. Goldie's going to be poring over the impacts of all of the bills that were passed and signed into law and where they impact our policy. Do those land on, do they go to the policy committee? Are they only brought before the board if there's a new policy that it might generate because we maybe don't have and not amending an old? And how much time does he need, and where does that fit? I'm just wondering, because I know that in one of my conversations with Dr. Estrella, she mentioned that this is the time at the end of the legislative session where the really focus is on, what do we have to do from a policy perspective? Because we know that legislative, judicial, or the cyclical review of all of our policies are the three levers that we have to always maintain in terms of our book of policy. And I want to make sure we don't shortchange those processes, especially the ones where we have to make those changes. And at the same time, like we've talked about earlier on the cell phone, it's a legislative act that we're responding to, and yet we want to take our time, we want to get input, we want to, so why would we bypass the policy committee on some of those? I don't know. I mean, that's kind of I'm just wondering why some get to the policy committee, even though it's a legislative act that's driving it, and you just basically kind of said, well, these legislative ones won't go to the policy committee. So where are we putting the time and effort into that? And I don't know if Dr. Goldie has has given himself a thought in terms of timing around what it's going to take to review everything and the impact, and then have those suggested edits to us. I'm just wondering how that all fits in.
Yeah, I think the best answer I can provide is that traditionally, those policies that are directed by law or by BOE rule, we we consider those compliant in nature, and therefore, there was an early idea that those types would not go to the policy committee. But let me be clear, the board, the collective board, can send any policy they would like through the policy committee. So that is not within your purview, right? I believed when we started this a year ago, Mr. Cleveland had put together a first-time policy calendar. And I think in one of our first training, that's where the board approved the policies that we would go throughout the year. I'm not sure, like Dr. Therese has said, that we made it through all those, so there may be some lagging. I heard Dr. Therese again say that he was going to put another policy calendar together for the next year. Now, you bring up a good point. The ones that we're going to see there's an impact now, for example, the literacy bill, 1193, that is going to have an impact. We talked about that today. There's some criteria in that literacy bill, from hiring literacy coaches to other things that need to be done. Those need to be done. We don't have a ability not to do those, right? So when we deem those to be compliant in nature, we would recommend not putting that through the policy committee. But just because we're making that recommendation doesn't mean that you have to adhere to that recommendation. The board can say, wait a second, George, we really like to hear, maybe get 10 literacy coaches together and do a consulting group. I mean, so you have that flexibility. But there had to be a way for us to determine the ones that we believe were governance in nature, and those that were the ones that you wanted feedback from constituents, teachers, students, parents. And those are the ones that I think that list is suggesting. If I heard you correctly, Dr. Teresa, after having people weigh in on that list, those are the ones you're suggesting for now. Doesn't mean that list cannot be expanded.
No, I mean, in fact, I think, Mr. Kennison, because Dr. Strayer has given us some direction around weighting, I don't have a problem with adding the cell phone policy. I do want to, though, say it really doesn't technically fall in the category of going to the policy committee because it's a compliance policy. It's by law. I think that is more of something that we work with the system. And certainly because our policies and the way the process is, they do lie on the table. So there are multiple ways. So I don't want people to think because they're not on the policy committee that they're not engaging in impacting policy. Our constituents have the opportunity when policies lay on the table. All of these policies will be laying on the table that come out of the policy committee. And the process is, and right, Ms. Stone, do you want to share? Because, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Therese. So to the question, my initial sentiment around why compliance policies may be discouraged from the policy committee is honestly for the sake of time. One of the things that we or I recall, I speak for a single board member, is one of the purposes for designing and creating the policy committee was to start doing the work of the board, which is to create policy. And outside of compliance board meetings, so this is where we can dedicate time and space to actually do that work. And if we have a policy primarily for legal compliance, i.e. cell phone policy, right? It's not going to the committee. It is going before the full board, but with the feedback and direction of our new leader who has provided feedback. But even with that, it probably will not see the policy committee because we are, if I can recall, we've pushed out at least 2 facilities policies. I know we didn't mention it today, but one policy passed out of committee last night, the facilities naming policy, right? That's something that we've been working on. Policy FD, which is before us today, we passed out at least 2 budget policies. We passed out our language policy, the first of its kind. So this is, a lot of it is work that is outside of the work that we do on the board or the work that is primarily for legal compliance.
And there's a lot of education and learning too. That's why it takes a while for certain policies to get through the policy committee because the school system is presenting to the policy committees to teach them or give them information on and background on what policies mean, what, the impact of policies, and also giving history and context around the particular subject area before they even delve into the policy. So it takes a while to get through the process because of the foundation of the education that's required for the policy committee. But I do want to share the importance of our community being able to engage in feedback of any policy that is laid on the table, that they can share and send an email, and they can engage with individual board members or send an email or provide feedback on a particular policy so that their voices are heard. And that's inclusive of the cell phone policy or any policies that are here. What comes out of the policy committee is not a direct vote. It is a recommendation that comes to the board, the governance team. So the first read comes out of the policy committee. We vote on the first read, and that's first read is for our governance team. It's just a suggestion. These are not experts, but we do have experts at the table with the policy committee working through the process with them. It comes to the board, and then the board then discusses and determines whether it's going to be laid on the table. So there's an additional process. If we decide we don't want it laid on the table as a board, it won't be laid on the table. But once it is laid on the table for community feedback, then that's where it's important that we, as board members and just constituents, and even at the ambassadors, we call them, right? Ms. Stone, we call.
Yes, they are ambassadors. We actually wrapped up our last meeting of the school year, I guess our first cohort, so to speak, of our policy committee. And one of the things that we've been echoing throughout the school year is our policy committee members are ambassadors, right? They can share, okay, here's what I learned in the policy committee from a district staff member about how we do this work. So Mr. Burke has presented on facilities, Chief Millard has presented on our budget, and so they are able to wrap their minds around it. And one of the really cool things is we had 2 students on the policy committee, and this was just invaluable, their feedback. And when they talked, we all listened because we wanted to inform that process. As an aside, colleagues, we are launching our round 2 of policy advisory committee with an anticipation starting June of our new. So most policy committee members rolled off of year 1. And so as we enter year 2 of our policy advisory committee, if you all could send me your nominations. Okay, great.
Good job. I think they have. So, all right. So I think if there's no further discussion, I want to pass this over to Dr. Simmons.
Thank you, Dr. Therese. I think the next topic on the agenda is discussion of the RFI responses pertaining to our equity audit solicitation. As you all likely recall, we distributed an RFI seeking a partner to come and provide support around implementing an equity audit that's inclusive of a multi-year longitudinal return on investment framework, evaluating our academic, operational, and fiscal returns. We also were looking for this partner to assist with forecasting and scenario planning related to enrollment, economic trends, and policy changes. We had 5 respondents to the proposal. And so at this time, I do want to engage our board in discussing next steps around those proposals. As a proposed next step for consideration, is the strategy of interviewing our perhaps top 2 to 3 respondents that we coalesce around as being those we would like to engage in dialogue further regarding their proposal. So this would be the time for us as a board to talk through the submissions that you had a chance to review as we seek to align on maybe 2 or 3 firms that we would like to engage in an interview with in an attempt to narrow down our final selection. So I'll open it up for discussion at this time. Okay, want to start?
Yes, we can. I want to preface this conversation or my remarks, feedback, that I support an interview process because this is very critical work, critical for GCPS and how we move forward and get a glimpse into at least 11 different indicators. And with this interview process, I think it's also equally important to have our new leader engage in that interview process as well. So I support an interview process as well as with our new leader sitting in on those interviews. And at this time, I have one recommendation.
Do you want to share or, right, do you want to share? Because the goal is to, if we can, the goal is to land on who we would like to invite to that interview this evening. So if you're willing to share tonight, please do so we can work toward that goal.
Oh, okay, perfect, thank you. I know that, so the one that I have highlighted is that I would love to learn more about and recommend moving forward towards an interview is education resource strategies.
Do you have any that you don't want to hear from?
We don't. Is that?
Are you talking to me? Is that question for me? I stand by my previous comment. I would like to hear more from education resource strategies.
I think after looking at all of the firms, I was like, it's really between 2 for very different reasons. And so I'd like to learn a bit more around the global strategies. However, I do have some different concerns around that. But my first choice is it's the same as the educational resource strategies.
You said it was between 2. You want to let us know who number 2 is?
I think I said education, global literacy consulting and education resource strategies, but my preference is education resource strategies as number 1. I mean, I do have some concerns around capacity and some other things here, but I'm really interested in learning more about global literacy, but I'm also okay with, if everyone just has one firm, I'm also okay with exploring that as well. So my preference is education resource strategies.
So I had 2 that I kind of landed on. It was fascinating because one of my 2 was one of your 2. And for kind of different reasons. I was fascinated by Global Literacy Consulting. Being a one-woman, seemed like a one-woman show. I'd love to learn a little bit more. Her submission was very interesting. And her story was pretty cool. I liked her price, being cost sensitive. And then American Institute for Research was another one that I settled on. I liked a company that's been in business a very long time, since 1946. I liked their leadership structure. Also appreciated their cost structure and their scenarios that they presented, the 3 different scenarios that they gave us.
Yeah, I had AIR probably at the top of my list. One of the things that stood out to me that I thought would be helpful, well, one, I like the fact that they have national scope in terms of research and data, but they have a Georgia context through their connection with Georgia State and the work that's done there. So from my perspective, I really liked that idea that there was a Georgia context, and I think that's incredibly important to not just constantly look at everything national without looking at it through a Georgia lens. And then the other thing that I saw that I thought was interesting and I thought would be helpful is that they already have a little bit of context with GCPS, having done a equity-centered leadership pipeline project in 2020, and so I like that. I think that I think they've got the experience that Mr. Gasper referred to, a Georgia lens that they'll look at it through, and some familiarity with GCPS.
Just the one? Is it just the one? Is it any that you don't want us to interview?
Yeah, that one-woman literacy one. No, just kidding.
Okay. Okay, so that makes it easy. I'm going to support both AIR as well as education resource strategies. So if we all agree, those would be the 2 to go forward. Are there any opposed to us moving forward with arranging to interview those 2 firms? And so what I imagine that would look like, as we've in the past done with the superintendent search process and looking to identify a partner, we'll arrange for 2 board members to conduct an interview with the firm. The interview will be recorded so that other board members are able to go back and to review the recording. I heard Ms. Stone mention including Dr. Estrella, so we'll check with her availability to be able to participate in those interviews if she has the capacity. And Lisa, will you help us and support us through this process? We appreciate you so much. So we will look to engage with the American Institutes for Research and the Education Resource Strategies groups in interviews as we attempt to land on a final partner in the work. Any other discussion or questions there?
How many interviews do we plan on doing? Is it just 2? It looks like the superintendent.
Just 2 interviews. Mm-hmm.
A virtual and an in person.
No,
Are y'all okay with recording?
I assumed they would be virtual.
Yes, all virtual. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I agree.
1 virtual interview with each firm. Yeah. Unless you're opposed to that or have some other ideas you want to discuss? No. Okay. Okay.
No, I'm okay with that.
All right. Well, I think we're clear on next steps. Thank you all.
All right, so the last piece is really kind of 2 questions that are connected. So one, if wanted to get a sense of how you like this format, of lighter load on the presentations, which leads to the second question in terms of, we have right now on calendar 2 potential presentations for June, the charter school resubmission, and then the district assessment update. If you want, we can move forward with the district assessment. If not, we can just keep the charter school to allow you 1 more month for this type of format, but it's really up to you.
I know that Ms. Stone,
Explain more about the district assessment update and maybe who requested it, just provide more context around what we're looking for in that update.
Yes, so I have some questions around, it's my understanding that the board had, this would be the first time analyzing or discussing district assessments. So my question is, would this discussion cover just, or focus on ELA, math, science, social studies, or would we include other content areas like CTAE? And then I also know that we may have had some discussion around exploring CTE pathways and discussing some of that data as well in the future.
I'll let Dr. Durrance kind of take a stab at it.
So I appreciate the request for the conversation, and I might be able to provide a little bit of context. So when we think about district assessments, we give those across core content areas. We only give the 4 core in grade levels in middle school and high school. We really focus on science and social studies with limited district assessments at the elementary level because we have a number of other assessments that we provide. But one of the things that I thought might be helpful for the board to know is that we've received a lot of feedback over the last year from a variety of constituent groups around our overall assessment program. And so one of the things that we most recently, as recent as today, had a conversation with the National Center for Assessment to actually perform an assessment system audit for the organization. And to begin with a series of interviews this summer, interviewing teachers, interviewing school leaders, and then moving on to some focus groups with our students and our families to really focus on understanding when we think about assessment, what do they expect assessment to look like? What's their actual experience? And what would the ideal look like? We know that coming out of the pandemic, we've made a lot of different decisions about various assessments that play different roles within the organization. And so we really feel like it's an opportunity for the district to say, what should assessment look like in GCPS? And also to provide information to Dr. Estrella as she comes into the organization to say this is what the footprint currently looks like, in addition to perhaps looking towards results. But for us, the district assessment program should be a program that's informing moves that teachers can make in their classroom, providing our school leaders with key information, and really thinking about how does that fit within our overall instructional framework. And so we know that we have certainly information that we could share about results, but I think the results are at this point a part of that story, and we'd like to be able to begin this process to have these outside experts come in, gather that feedback to strategically look at what does assessment look like for GCPS.
yeah, it sounds like we might, one board member, I'm just saying, it sounds like what you're saying is it might be a little bit premature if we don't, like if maybe the more robust information around it and some of the questions we may potentially ask may be answered with more context around the information you're sharing. So I guess my question is, I don't know if the board is willing to wait until, I don't know what timing you would suggest, but that might be a consideration for the board to decide on the timing around making sure we have all of the information available to us, which is a personal preference for me. I would rather have that information because some of the questions that I might ask might end up being answered in future information that you may be able to present. So if the system could share with us what would be an appropriate time schedule as a suggestion for the board. I also want to uplift and respect Ms. Stone's request and around the information, and understanding that we work with the system and want to make sure we have the data we need to really have a really robust and informed discussion.
And Dr. Therese, I appreciate the question. We could certainly look at providing the board with a little bit more insight into what the program actually looks like. So we could share with you, even this week, what grade levels and content areas do we provide district assessments for? What are all of the assessments that are part of our current program so that you would have context for that? The interview process will begin this summer, but we'll need to wait until our students are back to be able to engage with them. But we'll have some preliminary information as early as the beginning, probably in September, because we're looking to potentially partner as we think about leveraging the Family Advisory Council to have some really thoughtful conversations with our families. Being able to incorporate that's really when the phase one of that work would be able to be shared with the board. We could certainly provide additional information prior to that. I know, Ms. Stone, you mentioned some information around pathway completion. That information is finalized at the end of June, so perhaps even as early as July, we could provide some of that pathway information to know what that looked like for the school year for our students. But we'd love to be able to perhaps provide both, give the board some context, and then provide a more robust report as we get feedback from this outside organization that's going to partner to help understand what current context looks like and give us recommendations.
I want to hear that, the latter part, frankly, but I also know that this other information, July, you said, and it would be important. I know, I know, Ms. Stone, you could speak to this, but I know that's something, a request you had, but I do support getting that information. Maybe if you could share it in our weekly update, maybe that would be helpful, and whatever other updates you can provide on the information. In particular, you said there was some data around pre-phase one, I think, before September, or some context around.
We could certainly provide the information that explains what the current program looks like so that you know all of the assessments that are currently given. Part of what we want to be able to develop from this is the ability to understand what is the lived experience of both our students and our teachers in that. And that really will start to come together in September. And then they're actually engaged to work with us through the year to unpack what we're hearing and then really align and come up with a plan for what 27, 28 would look like for the school district to have a really coherent assessment system that's meeting the needs of all of our various stakeholders.
So I was thinking when you were sharing, Dr. Durrance, that for June, since that's, that it would be helpful from my perspective, and I was going to start by saying I'm not going to suggest, I'm going to say as a person, as a board member here, I would like to know the context. Because a lot of times when you start sharing all of the new stuff, I don't have the context. I'm like, well, wait, what's the change? How does that vary? I mean, sometimes it's hard to determine what the scope is if we don't really know where we're starting. And so I would like to suggest that for June that we do have a presentation that would give us that context and maybe even help us understand how things have shifted even in the last 5 years as we've rolled through the pandemic. Then when you do have the new stuff, we have a basis of knowledge to apply what you're sharing with us in terms of what's being recommended moving forward. That's just kind of my thought.
I appreciate that, Mr. Knudsen.
I like the idea around providing insight and context and the lived experience of students and teachers. I think it's also important to, as my colleague mentioned, having that 5-year trend. I would like to see, if my colleagues support, I would like to see trends, because especially the data that we have, if you could provide that data ahead of June, even if it's specifically to me, because I am curious around our interim data and growth, right? Because if you think about, I'll speak to my experience as a former ELA GCPS teacher, right? When we administered interims or the district assessments, it was a data point for growth. And I am just very curious around that particular data, specifically around ELA, math, and our core content, science and social studies.
I appreciate that, Ms. Stone. We can certainly look to see what's available. I will give context to say that our district assessments have undergone several shifts over the last few years. So we are limited in the trend information that's available because the assessments themselves have changed. And some of that is related to, if you remember, we implemented new math curriculum, and so those assessments changed. The language arts is brand new this year. Those were actually hold harmless for students, because part of this work is to understand how do those items work with students and not have students have to be held accountable for things that are brand new for our students and for our teachers. But we'll certainly look to see where we can provide that trend information, where we have given similar or the same assessments over time. It may be that more of the context is around what does the trend in the assessments look like as we think about which ones have been given across time. And then where data is available, we can certainly do that. But I know Ms. McLaren will be ready to provide a good overview of what that experience has looked like over the last several years since COVID was there, obviously focusing on where we can see trends and growth.
Thank you for the insight. And so as we think about June, what can we expect specifically, or do you all need more time to assess and think through June and potential district assessments as far as the content?
So I think the content will cover really a snapshot of what the assessment system looks like today, so that you can see what grade levels and content areas we have district assessments, to share a little bit about a lived experience at a particular grade level for a student, so you can see what the district is doing, with an understanding of there's a lot of assessment that teachers do in classrooms that won't be part of this particular overview. We will talk a little bit about how the assessments are actually developed, so that you know how our teachers are engaged in that work and the training that the assessment office provides. And then we'll talk about some of our district common final exams that we do provide in a couple of our other areas beyond the core areas. Those are not district assessments, but they are common final exams that our teachers develop that we help support with the administration. So that'll be the primary focus of that June presentation. Again, we'll also share with the board a high-level overview of what the study will look like over the next several months, so that you know what will be coming in terms of that outside study and audit of our current practices as we think about looking forward and improvement. Does that, Ms. Stone, help give context for what you should see in June?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, board members, I just want to, before we end our session, I want to confirm what we've talked about in our governance team session, just for clarity. I'm going to start off from the first conversation was about the constituent feedback at board meetings. We're all good. We know we talked about this in training. We're all good with the process around what was shared with Dr. Estrella and the follow-up process around the FAQs, and then having a tracking system for communication. Okay? And then the next thing was the superintendent transition. Board members provide recommendations for potential task force members to participate in that process. If we can make sure we get those recommendations in. Again, this is a superintendent transition task force, and so it is going to be led by Dr. Estrella and her team, and of course, our governance team or our board members will be engaging in the process, but it is led by the superintendent. The next thing is we are holding on the cell phone policy until we get more engagement from Dr. Estrella and her plan around what that looks like, and we might wait longer until we have that year when it's actually need to be implemented. And then we have the policy schedule. Are you all okay with, again, coming up with a suggested calendar schedule based on the list that we talked about today. Again, it can move, it's just giving us, or him, direction to create a schedule, and it can always evolve as it needs to. We okay with that? Okay. And then the equity audit, it looks like AIR and ERS interview two of us, virtual interviews, recorded, and Dr. Stray will be part of that process. Okay, and then the last thing is what we just talked about today is in June, we will have like a contextual presentation, and then we'll follow back up like in, I guess, September, or when appropriate, for the more robust conversation. I frankly would really be interested in having the longitudinal data and the comprehensive information that's needed, because I'm sure there will be some questions that'll probably feed into the September. I'm already warning you, I'm probably going to ask some. You can just say, you know, we can wait until September. We're still evaluating that. But anything you can also share in our weekly board meetings may also be helpful as well. I think that's it. We're good with everything else?
Dr. Treese, just one item I wanted to give the board a quick heads up on to expect. I spoke with Dr. Estrella today and also talked to Dr. Taylor and Chief Harden a little bit about the need for some a little bit more leniency with regard to some hiring. We have a very strict policy on hiring, particularly leadership positions, and we're going to present for your consideration on Thursday night a resolution that would suspend some of those requirements to allow more expedited hiring for some executive positions. We can talk more specifically in executive session about more of that, but I just wanted to let you know to expect that on Thursday. I'll try to draft something here today and get that around for consideration, but it'll be presented and hopefully voted on Thursday night. We'll need an amendment to the agenda. We'll probably have the superintendent make that recommendation, but I just wanted to let you know about that in advance.
I would just encourage any of our board members, if they have more questions or concerns, definitely engage Dr. Estrella in conversations one-on-one if you have any questions or concerns, and also our Mr. Pereira as well. So. All right, we're good? Thank you all so very much. Thank you to our board, our governance team. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Thank you, staff. Thank you all so very much for your time, and have a good night.